Look at the results. He's not mine.
Get out!
Every person in the room went still. Mara Solano, who had been standing at the kitchen counter with a dish towel still in her hands, felt the words land the way a flat stone lands on water, not with a splash, but with a skip and then a slow, irreversible sink. Ryan Caldwell had not looked at her when he said it. He had looked at the paper. He had been looking at the paper for 3 days. She now understood, carrying it folded inside his jacket, like a verdict he had already accepted before he walked through the door. The dish towel dropped from her fingers, and she did not pick it up. The baby was asleep in the next room. She had checked twice before Ryan arrived, the way she always checked before difficult conversations, as though the ritual of making sure Ava was safe could hold the rest of the world together by proximity. Ryan set the paper on the kitchen table between them. He was 31 years old, and that night he looked older than that, or maybe younger. She could not decide which. His jaw was set in the particular way it set when he had already made a decision and was now performing the act of communicating it, not the act of arriving at it. She had learned to read that jaw in 4 years. She had learned a great many things about Ryan Caldwell in 4 years, and none of them were useful to her now. "I need you to understand," he said, and his voice was careful, "that I had it done at a different lab, not the first one. A different one." He tapped the paper once with 2 fingers. Both came back the same. Mara looked at the paper. She did not touch it. She was aware, in the distant way one is aware of weather through a window, that she should be saying something. She should be crying, or reaching for him, or asking him who, asking him how, demanding to know how he could stand there in the kitchen where she had made breakfast for him every Saturday for 4 years and place a piece of paper on the table like it was a bill to be settled. Instead, she heard herself ask a question she had not planned to ask. "Did your mother know before you did?" Ryan's expression shifted. "Not much, just enough. That's not what this is about. That's not an answer." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, which she had not expected, which meant he intended to have a conversation rather than deliver a conclusion and leave. She was not sure if that was better or worse. The apartment was very quiet. Outside, somewhere below on the street, a car had been idling for the last 20 minutes. She had noticed it when she put Ava down. He had glanced through the curtain and registered a dark sedan. No lights, engine running. And then she had told herself it was nothing, and she had believed herself because she needed to. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Ryan said. He said it slowly, which was how he said things he had rehearsed. "I'm telling you what the results show. 2 independent tests. Mara. Tvo. I know what 2 means. Then you understand why I can't." He stopped, started again. "I can't stay in a situation where I don't know the truth." She looked at him across the table. This man she had cooked for, argued with, slept beside, held in a hospital waiting room when his father had a minor cardiac event 2 winters ago. This man, whose middle name she knew, whose coffee order she had memorized, whose face she had watched change in small ways over 4 years, the way you watch someone's face change when you love them and you are paying attention. She looked at him, and she understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that the worst thing was not that he believed the results. The worst thing was that he had not once, in whatever weeks or months this had been building, looked at her and asked. He had not asked. He had gone to a second lab instead. "Are you going to say anything?" His voice had softened slightly, which she knew meant he was hoping she would make this easier, give him something to work with, cry, or explain, or hand him a path toward feeling less like the man who was doing what he was doing. She did not give him a path. "I think you should get your things." Ryan stood. She watched him stand, and she did not feel what she had expected to feel, which was devastating. She felt something colder and stranger. The specific stillness of a person who has just understood that she has been standing on ground that was never solid and has now, at last, stopped pretending otherwise. He went to the bedroom. She heard him opening the closet, the particular sound of hangers being moved along a rod, the thud of the duffel bag he kept on the upper shelf. The baby monitor on the counter crackled softly. Ava was still asleep. Mara picked up the dish towel from the floor and folded it and set it on the counter and pressed both palms flat against the edge of the sink and breathed. He came back with the duffel over his shoulder and his laptop bag and the small framed photo from the nightstand that was a picture of him and his friends from college. Not a picture of the two of them. And she noticed that and did not say so. At the door, he paused. She had not moved from the sink. "I don't want this to be ugly," he said. "I hope you know that. Then leave without making it ugly." He left. The door clicked shut behind him with a sound that was much smaller than the occasion deserved. She stood at the sink for a long time. Then she lifted the baby monitor and walked to the bedroom and stood in the doorway watching Ava sleep. This 8-month-old person who had her own fingers and her own breathing and her own particular way of turning her head to the left when she settled deep into sleep. And Mara thought, whatever you believe, you just left. You were wrong. She went to the window. Not the kitchen window, the one in the sitting room that looked down over the street. She held Ava against her shoulder and she looked down. The dark sedan was still there. It had been there before Ryan arrived. It was still there now that he was gone. As she watched, the lights inside the car came on for a moment, casting a pale rectangle of illumination across the interior, and she had the impression of a person sitting very still in the driver's seat. Not moving, simply present. Then the light went off. The engine continued to idle. The car did not move. She stood at the window for a long time. Ava made a small sound and resettled against her shoulder. The car stayed. She did not know what to make of it. She did not know what to make of any of it. What she knew was that her daughter was warm and breathing and present, and that whatever had been built in this apartment over 4 years had just been disassembled with surgical efficiency by a man who chose a laboratory over a conversation, and that she was still standing. The car idled. The night was clear and cold, and the street below was empty in both directions except for that one vehicle. Still, patient, facing north, like it had somewhere to be, and had decided not to go yet. She put Ava back to bed at 11:40. She did not sleep until well after 2 in the morning, and when she finally did, she dreamed of nothing, which was a mercy. In the morning, the sedan was gone. In its place, on the mat outside her apartment door, was a business card with no name on it. Only a phone number, and beneath the number, in small, clean type, 3 words, Times, she is safe. The business card was still on her kitchen table 3 days later, face down, which was how she had placed it the morning she found it. She had not thrown it away. She had not called the number. She had put Ava in the bouncy chair on the counter and made coffee and looked at the card and decided that a person who wanted to harm her would not leave a note that said her daughter was safe, and then she had turned it over so she did not have to keep looking at it. That was the extent of her decision-making about the card for 72 hours. On the 4th day, Eleanor Caldwell's lawyer called. He was polite in the way that lawyers are polite when they are doing something they know is not polite. He explained that his client, as the paternal grandmother of the minor child Ava Caldwell, had retained counsel to pursue visitation rights in the interest of the child's welfare, and that he was calling as a professional courtesy to inform Mara of the filing before she received formal notice. He used the phrase "in the interest of the child's welfare" twice. He did not use the phrase, "we intend to make your life very difficult." But Mara had been a paralegal for 6 years, and she heard it clearly in the spaces between his sentences. She thanked him and hung up and sat down on the floor next to Ava's bouncy chair and stayed there for a while. She called the only family law attorney she knew personally, a woman named Diane, who had done contract work at her firm 3 years ago. Diane picked up on the second ring, listened without interrupting, and then said, with the calm of someone delivering a weather forecast, "Eleanor Caldwell." As in the Caldwell group, Eleanor Caldwell. Mara said yes. Diane was quiet for a moment. "Mara, I want to help you. You know I do. But I need you to understand what you are walking into here. That family has 4 lawyers on retainer and a family court judge who golfs with Richard Caldwell every other Sunday." A pause. "I'll make some calls. But you need to find resources I don't have." That night, after Ava was down, Mara picked up the business card and dialed the number. It rang 4 times. Then a man's voice, unhurried, said, "I was wondering when you'd call." His English was unaccented and precise. The kind of precise that comes from someone who has learned to be careful with language. He did not identify himself. He did not ask who she was. He simply waited, as though he had time and was comfortable in it. "Who are you?" she said. "Someone who has been watching your building for reasons that have nothing to do with you, who noticed something that does have something to do with you, and who made a decision about what to do with that information." A brief pause. "I'd rather explain in person. I'm not meeting a stranger in person." "That's reasonable. You can bring whoever you want. I'll be at the coffee shop on the corner of West 19th and 8th Avenue tomorrow morning at 9. I'll be the one reading the newspaper. You can watch from outside for as long as you need to before you decide to come in." She almost said no. She was aware that almost was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. "You left me a note that said my daughter was safe. Why would you do that if you didn't know something was wrong?" He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice had shifted in some small way. She could not precisely name. Like a room that is the same room but with a window now open. Because she is. And because you needed to know that someone knew that, even if you didn't know who. She hung up. She sat with the card in her hand. Then she put it in the drawer with the takeout menus and went to bed. She was outside the coffee shop at 8:50 the next morning. Ava in the carrier against her chest, standing across the street with a coffee she had bought at a different place, 2 blocks north. The man was already inside. He was sitting with his back to the wall facing the door, which she noted immediately because it was not the seat of someone who had come in and picked the first available chair. It was the seat of someone who always sat facing the door. He had dark hair and was wearing a gray jacket over a dark shirt. No tie. And he was, in fact, reading a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, which in her experience, no one under 50 did anymore. He looked to be somewhere in his mid-30s. He had not looked up when she walked past the window. She did not think he had failed to notice her. She went in at 9:03. He folded the newspaper when she was still 4 steps from the table, which meant he had been tracking her in his peripheral vision the entire time. He did not stand. He waited. She sat down across from him, adjusting the carrier so Ava faced outward. His eyes moved to the baby for a fraction of a second and then back to her face. And in that fraction, she saw something that was not what she expected, which was calculation. It was something quieter than that. "Luca Ferri," he said. The name landed. She had heard it before, not in any direct context, but in the peripheral way you hear certain names in a city like New York in half-finished sentences. In the particular pause that falls after someone says a name, and before they say what they actually mean to say, she kept her face still. "You know why I'm here," she said. "You received a call from a lawyer representing Eleanor Caldwell." He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on its saucer. "The filing was made 6 days ago. You were the last person to be notified." How do you know when the filing was made? Because I have been watching the Caldwell family's financial movements for 14 months as part of an investigation that has nothing to do with you or your daughter. 3 months ago, in the course of that investigation, I came across a payment made from an Eleanor Caldwell personal account to a physician named Gerald Hartley at the Meridian Diagnostic Center in Midtown. He said this the way someone states a known address. No drama, no pause for effect. The payment was made 11 days before the results of your second paternity test were returned. Mara was quiet for a moment. That doesn't mean what you're saying it means. No, on its own it doesn't. He reached inside his jacket and placed a folded document on the table between them. He did not push it toward her. He let it sit. That does. She looked at it without touching it. She had a habit, she was realizing, of not touching things people put in front of her. What is it? A lab technician named Doreen Vasquez filed an internal complaint at Meridian 4 months ago, alleging that she had been instructed to alter the results of a paternity test. The complaint was suppressed internally. She was let go 2 weeks later. I have a signed statement from her, taken last month. He picked up his coffee. The sample numbers on the complaint match the case number on your file. The coffee shop was not loud, but it was not quiet either. Somewhere behind her, a child was asking for a refill of orange juice. The espresso machine produced a sustained mechanical shriek and then subsided. Ava had fallen asleep against her chest, which Ava did with unnerving reliability in the carrier, and Mara felt the warm weight of her and thought this is what they tried to take. This exact, warm, sleeping weight. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Her voice came out level, which cost her something. Luca set the cup down. He looked at her with the directness of someone who does not use indirectness as a social tool. Because the information exists, and you are the person it belongs to. And because Eleanor Caldwell has now initiated a legal process that could result in a judge making decisions about your daughter based on a falsified document. He said it simply, without the rehearsed gravity Ryan's lawyer had used. You should have it. This isn't your problem. No, he agreed. It isn't. She waited for him to say more. He did not. She looked at the document, still sitting on the table between them, and then she picked it up and opened it and read the first 2 paragraphs. The case number was there. She closed it. I need to talk to an attorney before I do anything with this. Of course. And I need to verify that this woman's statement is real. I can arrange for you to speak with her directly. She's in Newark. She's been waiting for someone to ask. Mara tucked the document into the bag hanging from the carrier strap. She stood. Ava stirred and resettled. Across the table. Luca Ferri did not move to stop her, or slow her, or add anything to what he had already said. And she found that she noticed this. The way you notice when something is absent, that you had prepared yourself to resist. I don't know what you want from me, she said. I know. He picked up the newspaper. That's fine for now. She left. On the street, she walked half a block before she stopped and stood still for a moment, one hand resting on Ava's back through the carrier. Her heart beat steadier than it had any right to be. He had known. He had known for months. He had known, and he had put a man outside her building, and he had left a card on her doorstep, and he had not, at any point, walked through her door without being asked. She did not know what to do with that. She filed it carefully in the part of her mind where she kept things that required more time than she currently had, and she walked toward the subway. And she called Diane from the platform, and she said, I think I found the resources. The family court building on Lafayette Street smelled like recycled air and old carpet, and the particular anxiety of people who had come to argue about things that mattered. Mara arrived 40 minutes early with Diane beside her and a tote bag containing Ava's spare outfit, 2 pouches of pureed sweet potato, a legal pad with notes she had made at 2 in the morning. and the folded copy of Doreen Vasquez's signed statement that Diane had reviewed, verified, and declared admissible with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting her whole career for exactly this kind of document. Doreen Vasquez had spoken to Mara on the phone for 41 minutes, 3 days before the hearing. She had a voice that was tired in the specific way of someone who had been carrying something heavy and alone for too long. And she told the story without embellishment. The instruction from the lab supervisor. The name, Gerald Hartley. The case number she had been given. The replacement sample. The internal complaint she had filed, and the meeting she had been called into 2 weeks later, where she was told her position was being eliminated due to restructuring. She had kept copies of everything. She said she had kept them because she did not know what else to do with the knowledge of what she had done and what she had been made to do. And keeping the copies was the only form of not entirely disappearing that she had been able to manage. Mara had listened to all of it, and then she had said thank you in a voice she barely recognized, and hung up and sat very still in her kitchen for a long time. Now she sat in a wooden chair in courtroom 4B and watched the door. Eleanor Caldwell arrived at 9:50 with 2 lawyers and Ryan. Ryan was wearing a suit she had never seen before, charcoal gray, and he sat down on the other side of the room without looking at her, which was somehow worse than if he had looked. Eleanor sat between her lawyers with the composed expression of a woman attending a function she has organized and expects to go well. She was 63 years old and had the particular kind of beauty that comes from spending 63 years believing in one's own correctness. She did not look at Mara either. That, Mara understood, was not rudeness. It was strategy. She was a person beneath Eleanor's notice. That was the argument Eleanor intended to make. The judge was a woman named Honorable Patricia Wren, which Mara had noted with cautious relief because Diane had told her that the judge who golfed with Richard Caldwell was named Honorable Michael Burrows, and Honorable Patricia Wren was not him. The substitution had happened 4 days ago, when Judge Burrows developed what the court clerk described as a scheduling conflict. Mara had not asked Luca Ferri if he knew anything about a scheduling conflict. She had decided there were things she would ask later and things she would not ask at all. The hearing opened. Eleanor's lead attorney, a man named Stevens who had the bearing of someone who billed at rates that made other attorneys briefly reconsider their career choices, presented the petition for grandparent visitation. He was thorough and he was smooth, and he used the phrase best interests of the child 7 times in 11 minutes, which Mara counted because counting gave her somewhere to put her hands that was not around his throat. The core of the argument was this: the paternity of the child had been established as outside the Caldwell family. Therefore, the child had no biological connection to the Caldwell family. Therefore, Eleanor Caldwell's petition for visitation as a concerned and invested party in the child's life was a matter of emotional continuity and stability for the minor child, who had spent the first 8 months of her life in proximity to the Caldwell family network. When Stevens finished, Judge Wren looked at Diane, counsel for the respondent. Diane stood. She was 52 and wore sensible shoes and had a voice that carried without effort. She said, "Your Honor, the respondent wishes to introduce new evidence that is directly material to the petition before the court." She placed the document package on the clerk's desk. Specifically, evidence that the paternity determination on which the petitioner's standing in this matter is entirely based was obtained through the deliberate falsification of laboratory results, at the direction of the petitioner herself. The room did not go loud. It went the specific quiet of a space where everyone has stopped breathing at the same moment. Eleanor's expression did not change, which told Mara more than a changed expression would have. Ryan turned his head and looked at Mara for the first time since he had walked in, and she looked back at him, and she held his gaze until he looked away first. The hearing did not conclude that day. Judge Wren granted a continuance of 30 days to allow both parties to respond to the new evidence, ordered that no change in the child's current custodial arrangement was to take place during that period, and directed the petitioner's counsel to preserve all communications between Eleanor Caldwell and the Meridian Diagnostic Center, pending further review. Stevens requested a sidebar. The sidebar did not appear to go well for Stevens. In the hallway afterward, while Diane spoke quietly on her phone near the elevator bank, and Mara stood with Ava on her hip, watching the morning light come through the high windows, Ryan walked over. He stopped a few feet away, not close enough to be confrontational, not far enough to be dismissed. He was holding his jacket over one arm, and he looked, she thought, like a man who had just understood the shape of a room he had been standing in for months without seeing it clearly. Mara. His voice was low. I didn't know. She looked at him. He was the father of her daughter. He was also the man who had taken 2 paternity tests, rather than have one honest conversation with her, and who had sat on the other side of a courtroom this morning while his mother's lawyers argued for access to a child whose existence in the Caldwell family they had gone to considerable criminal lengths to erase. Both of these things were true at the same time. She had spent some time recently learning to hold 2 true things at the same time. I know you didn't know, she said. That's the part I keep getting stuck on. He looked at her carefully, the way he used to look at her sometimes in the early years, the way that had once made her feel seen. What does that mean? It means the question isn't whether you knew about the test, Ryan. The question is what you know about yourself, about the fact that you went to a second lab, about the fact that you sat next to your mother this morning. She shifted Ava on her hip. Ava grabbed a fistful of her collar. About the fact that the first thing you did when things got complicated was find evidence, not find me. He was quiet for long enough that she understood he did not have an answer for that. Or he had one, but it required more honesty than he had managed to bring with him this morning. I need to know she's mine, he said finally. The word mine landed in a way she did not think he intended, but that she heard regardless. I need to know the truth. The truth is, in the evidence package your mother's lawyers are reading right now. She walked back to Diane without waiting to see his face when he understood what she meant. On the way out of the building, she texted one word to the number on the business card. It said times today went okay. She did not expect a response. Before she reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, her phone buzzed once. I know. Good. She stopped on the bottom step. She looked at the message for a long moment. The midday light was very bright on the stone steps, and Ava squinted against it and made a small, disgruntled sound, and Mara thought, with a clarity that surprised her, he knew how today went before I told him. He is always there before I think to look. She did not know yet what to do with a person like that. She was starting to understand that figuring it out might be worth the effort. She texted back times, "How did you know about the judge?" The reply came after a pause long enough to suggest consideration rather than evasion. Scheduling conflicts happen. She put the phone in her bag. She walked to the corner with her daughter on her hip and the afternoon opening up in front of her. And for the first time in a long time, she did not feel like a person who was about to be overtaken by something. She felt like a person who had just found her footing. It was not a large feeling. It was the right size. Ryan Caldwell received the message on a Tuesday morning at 10:17. Which Mara would later piece together from the sequence of events that followed. The message was not a text. It was a printed card, delivered by a courier to the Caldwell Group offices on Park Avenue, addressed to Ryan personally, Markel, private, and containing a time, a location, and 1 sentence times. Come alone, or the documentation goes to the Times by end of business. He came alone. The location was a private dining room above an Italian restaurant in Tribeca that had been in operation for 30 years and had the kind of reputation that meant the staff did not ask questions, and the lighting was always low enough that faces were difficult to distinguish from the street. Luca was already seated when Ryan arrived, with a glass of water and a manila folder on the table in front of him that was thick enough to suggest it had been assembled with care over a significant period of time. He did not stand when Ryan walked in. He gestured at the chair across from him the way a person gestures at a chair in a room they own. Ryan sat. He was composed in the way that men who have been raised in families with money learn to be composed, surface stillness over interior turbulence. The performance of control substituting for the experience of it. He looked at the folder, and then at Luca, and said nothing, which was the right instinct, even if it was arrived at by the wrong process. Luca opened the folder. He did not hand it across the table. He turned it so Ryan could read from where he was sitting, and he laid out the pages one at a time, with the deliberate pace of someone who understood that comprehension takes longer than reading. The first page was a bank transfer record, Eleanor Caldwell's personal account. A wire of $32,000 to a medical consulting firm registered in Delaware that had no website and no physical office, and whose sole officer was a man named Gerald Hartley. The date was 11 days before Ryan received the second paternity test result. The second page was Doreen Vasquez's signed statement, which Ryan read without moving, his eyes going from line to line at a pace that slowed when he reached the section containing the case number. The third page was a side-by-side comparison of the case number on the original test documentation Ryan had received and the case number in Vasquez's complaint. They were identical. The fourth page was a photograph taken by a security camera in the lobby of the Meridian Diagnostic Center, date and time stamped, showing Eleanor Caldwell and a man Luca identified in a caption below as Gerald Hartley, standing together near the reception desk on a morning 6 weeks before the second test was administered. Ryan sat with the fourth page in front of him for a long time. The restaurant was quiet. Somewhere below them the lunch service was beginning, and there were the distant sounds of a kitchen in preparation. The specific percussion of a professional kitchen that carries through walls and floors and makes its way upward, whether anyone wants to hear it or not. She told me, Ryan said finally. His voice was flat in the particular way of a voice that has removed its own texture to prevent it from breaking. She told me you can't always trust the first result. She told me that because she loved me, she needed me to be certain. He set the page down. She made the appointment for the second test. I thought she was being thorough. I thought she was helping. Luca said nothing. He let the silence do what silence does in rooms where people are arriving at things they should have arrived at sooner. Why are you doing this? Ryan looked up. It was the same question he had no doubt been constructing since he received the card that morning. The question underneath which were several other questions he had not yet organized into language. Why does a man like you know about my mother? Why does a man like you care about Mara Solano? What do you want from this? What do you want from her? You're not doing this for nothing. I'm doing this, Luca said, because your mother has now filed a legal action that, if successful, would give her court-ordered access to a child she has already demonstrated she is willing to falsify medical records to control. The child is not a bargaining position. She is 8 months old. He closed the folder, and because the woman raising her deserves to do that without your family's lawyers in her living room. Ryan's jaw moved. Something shifted behind his eyes. A recalibration of some kind. Slow and visible. He was not a stupid man. Mara had never thought he was a stupid man. He was a man who had organized his understanding of the world around the premise that his mother's judgment was sound, and that premise was currently being disassembled page by page on a table in Tribeca. Ava is mine, he said. It was not a question. Yes. The word sat between them. Ryan looked at the folder. He put one hand flat on the table and then removed it. He was 31 years old, and he looked. In that moment, like someone substantially younger who was being asked to carry something he was not sure he was built for. What do I have to do? Nothing that benefits me. The petition your mother filed needs to be withdrawn. That requires your signature as the named biological father on the original birth documentation, which your mother's lawyers have used as part of their standing argument. Luca picked up his water glass. Without your cooperation, the withdrawal takes longer and goes through channels that will be significantly more public. With it, Diane Okafor files the paperwork by end of week, and the matter is closed before the continuance date. And the evidence stays where it is unless your mother attempts to refile or to approach Mara or the child through any other means. At that point, it goes to the appropriate authorities. He said it without inflection. It was not a threat in the way that threats are performed. It was a description of a sequence of events. Ryan appeared to understand the difference. Ryan stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and held it for a moment. He looked at Luca with the expression of a man attempting to categorize something that does not fit any category he has available. She trusted you, he said. Not an accusation, an observation. Mara. She wouldn't have used that evidence in court if she didn't trust where it came from. She verified it independently. That's not what I mean. He put his jacket on. He smoothed the lapel with one hand, a gesture so automatic it was clearly something he had done 10,000 times. A small, habitual act of composure. I mean, she trusted the person behind it. She doesn't trust easily. She never did. A pausa. I used to think that was a flaw. He left. Luca sat for a moment in the empty room. Below him, the kitchen sounds continued. Unhurried. The business of nourishment proceeding without reference to the conversation that had just taken place above it. He finished his water. He left cash on the table and walked out through the back, the way he had come in. That evening, at 7:40, Mara heard a knock at her apartment door. She opened it with Ava on her hip, expecting Diane, and found no one. On the doormat was a manila envelope, unsealed, containing a single sheet of paper, the signed withdrawal of Eleanor Caldwell's petition for grandparent visitation, with Ryan Caldwell's signature at the bottom next to the line marked Times Biological Father's Consent. No note, no explanation, just the signature. In the handwriting, she had watched sign birthday cards and lease agreements, and the receipt for the crib they had assembled together on a Sunday afternoon, 8 months before Ava was born. She stood in the doorway for a long time. Ava reached for the envelope with both hands, and Mara let her take it because the paper was already signed, and the weight of it in Ava's small grip was, somehow, the right ending to the evening. She called Diane. She texted Luca a photograph of the signature page with no message attached. His response came in under a minute. Good. Diane will file tomorrow. She looked at her phone. She looked at her daughter. She thought about the question Ryan had left her with in the hallway outside the courtroom. The one she had not answered, because it was not hers to answer in that moment. He had asked what she meant when she said the truth was in the evidence package. He had meant it as a question about the test. She had meant something larger. She had meant the truth is that you had a choice between two ways of knowing, and you chose the one that required less of you. She did not say this to him in the hallway, because it would have been unkind, and she was trying, with increasing deliberateness, to spend her energy on things that were not unkindness. She put Ava to bed at 8:30. She stood at the window afterward, the same window where she had stood on the night Ryan left, and watched a dark sedan idle on the street below. The street was empty tonight. No sedan. No waiting engine. She was aware that the absence of the car did not mean the absence of the person, and that this thought did not frighten her the way it perhaps should have. She was aware of a great many things about Luca Ferri that she had filed carefully in the part of her mind reserved for things requiring more time. She thought she might be ready to take some of them out. She did not plan what she was going to say. She had spent 11 days since the envelope on the doormat, telling herself she was going to plan it, and then not planning it. And on the 12th day, she put Ava in the carrier and walked 14 blocks north to the address she had found by the only means available to her, which was asking Diane, who had sighed the sigh of a woman who had given up being surprised by Mara Solano and written it on a post-it note without further comment. The building was a converted warehouse in Chelsea, 8 stories. No markings on the exterior except a small brass number beside the door. There was a doorman who looked at her with the careful neutrality of someone trained to assess without appearing to assess. She gave her name. He made a call. He directed her to the elevator without asking her to sign anything, which she noted because it meant Luca had been told she was coming before she arrived, which meant someone had been watching the street, which meant nothing had changed except that she was now walking into it willingly instead of standing at a window, looking down at it from above. The elevator opened directly into the apartment, which occupied the entire 8th floor and had the kind of proportions that result from removing all interior walls and deciding what to put back with great deliberateness. The east wall was windows, floor to ceiling, facing the city. The furniture was sparse and chosen with the preference of someone who values function and dislikes clutter. There were books on a low shelf along the north wall, actual books with cracked spines, and a desk near the window with nothing on it except a lamp and a single folder. The apartment looked like a place where someone lived and worked and did not host parties. It looked, she thought, like the interior of a very organized and somewhat guarded mind. Luca was standing near the windows when she stepped out of the elevator. He was in dark trousers and a gray shirt with the sleeves pushed up, no jacket, which was the least formal she had seen him and which made him look, not smaller, exactly, but more present, more like a person and less like a position. He looked at her and then at Ava in the carrier, and something in his face did what it had done in the coffee shop. That small, quiet shift she still did not have precise language for. "You walked," he said, 14 blocks. Ava had fallen asleep somewhere around block 9, which was a mercy because it meant Mara could have this conversation without managing an audience. I needed the time to think. Did it help? Some. She looked around the apartment. She looked back at him. She had been constructing this moment for 11 days in the loose, undisciplined way you construct things you are not yet ready to finish. And now that she was in it, she found that the scaffolding she had built was unnecessary. The thing she wanted to say was simple. It had always been simple. She had just needed 11 days to stop making it complicated. I want to ask you some things, and I want you to answer them honestly, which I think you will, because I don't think you know how to do the other thing. He indicated the couch. She sat. He sat in the chair across from her, not beside her, which she understood was a choice about not crowding the conversation. She had begun, without fully deciding to read his choices the way she had once read Ryan's jaw, as a language that told her something truer than whatever was being said out loud. "Why did you leave the card?" she said. "The first one. On my doorstep that first morning. You didn't have to do that. You could have kept watching and waited until you had a reason that was cleaner, more professional." He was quiet for a moment. "Because you came to the window," he said. "You were holding her, and you looked down at the car, and you didn't look frightened. You looked like someone who had already decided they were not going to be frightened, regardless of what they were looking at. And I thought, a pause. I thought that was a person who deserved to know that someone was paying attention, even if they didn't know who." Ava shifted in the carrier and resettled with a small sound, and did not wake. Mara kept her eyes on Luca. "You could have told me sooner. About the test. About Eleanor." "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because the information wasn't ready." And because I wasn't certain you would believe it from me before you had a reason to, he looked at her steadily. And because I needed to understand what I was doing before I did it, whether I was acting on behalf of a situation or on behalf of a person, which was it? By the time I left the card, it was the person. The city outside the windows was doing what the city always did, which was everything at once and without apology. She could see 3 water towers from where she sat, and the upper floors of a building that had been a factory and was now apartments, and the particular grey-blue of the November sky that she had always found more honest than summer sky. Less interested in being beautiful, she had lived in this city for 9 years. She had spent most of them keeping her head down and her expectations calibrated to what she could verify and manage. And it had been, she now understood, a kind of safety that was also a kind of poverty. "I know what you do," she said. "Not the details, but the shape of it. Diane told me enough, and I'm not naive about the rest." She watched his face. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not aware of it or that it doesn't matter. I wouldn't ask you to. But I also know that you put a man outside my building for weeks to make sure no one got near us. And that you found Doreen Vasquez and sat with her until she trusted you enough to sign her name to something that could have cost her considerably. And that you gave Ryan Caldwell the chance to do the right thing before you made it public. You didn't have to do any of those things in that order." She looked at him. "The order matters to me." Luca leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, his hands loose. It was the posture of someone who was listening with their whole body, rather than waiting for a pause to speak into. "It matters to me too," he said. "That's not a recent development." She believed him. She believed him in the way you believe things that have been demonstrated rather than declared. And she was aware that this was a different kind of believing than she had practiced before, and that it required her to extend something she had been conserving for a long time. "I need to ask you one more thing," she said. "All right. What is her name?" He did not ask her to clarify which her. He did not pause to consider his answer. He looked at Mara and said Ava. Ava Rose Solano. She was born on a Thursday in March. She weighs 19 pounds as of last month. She turns her head to the left when she falls into deep sleep. A beat. You check on her twice before any conversation you think will be difficult, because making sure she is settled is the thing that holds everything else together. The room was very quiet. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Something in her chest that had been braced against the possibility of being wrong about this, about him, about her own judgment, released in the careful way of a thing that has been held tightly for so long. The release itself takes time. It did not feel like falling. It felt like setting something down. "You've been watching for a long time," she said. "Long enough to know the difference between watching and caring. I know which one this became." She nodded once. It was a small movement, and it contained, she thought, an unreasonable amount of information. She stood, and he stood, and they were closer than the furniture arrangement had suggested they would be, which was either an accident of the room or not. And Ava was warm and breathing between them like the most consequential thing in the space, which she was. Mara put one hand flat against Luca's chest, not pulling him closer, not pushing him back, just the specific weight of a hand placed deliberately against a person she had decided to stop standing at a distance from. "I'm not easy," she said. "I want you to know that before anything else, I'm not going to be easy." "I know." His hand came up and covered hers. One brief moment of contact, and then he stepped back and gave her the room she needed to stand in her own decision. "I'm not in a hurry." She left an hour later. Ava still asleep in the carrier. The November air cold enough to make her pull the carrier cover up over the baby's head. At the corner she stopped and looked back at the building. 8 floors of converted brick against a sky that was going the color of old pewter in the early evening. The light was on in the top floor. She turned and walked home. She fed Ava at 6:30 and bathed her at 7 and read to her from the board book about the bear who couldn't sleep, which Ava regarded with the serious attention she brought to all books, as though she understood that the information was important and intended to retain it. She put her down at 7:45 and stood in the doorway of the small bedroom, watching the small chest rise and fall in the dark. This person, who had her own breathing and her own preferences and her own particular way of turning her head to the left when she went deep under. And Mara thought, we are going to be all right. Not because someone arrived to make it so. Because we decided to be, and because, for the first time in a long time, she had let someone stand close enough to help her mean it. She went to the window. The street below was quiet and cold and lit by the amber of the street lamps, in the way that New York streets are lit in November. Warmly and inadequately, just enough to see by. There was no dark sedan at the curb. There was no waiting engine. No rectangle of interior light, signaling a patient presence below. He was not outside tonight. He did not need to be. She stood at the window for a few minutes anyway, out of habit, and then she let the curtain fall and went to make tea. And the apartment was warm, and the baby was sleeping, and that was enough. That was, for tonight, exactly enough.